The rain had been falling for 3 days without rest. Inside the old stone temple, where the ceiling was cracked open to the gray sky, Elias worked alone. His chisel struck the marble in slow rhythm. Tick, 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 the sound echoing like a heartbeat in the empty hall. Every hit carved a line. Every breath filled the air with dust and ghostly light. He was shaping the figure of a woman. Not a queen, not a saint, just a face he had seen once in a dream, sorrowful, beautiful, and distant. Her eyes were half open, as if she wanted to wake, but could not. Elias had been trying to finish this statue for months, but something always stopped him near the end. He said it was imperfection, but deep down he knew it was fear of what his hands could bring to life. Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains. The kingdom beyond the hills had forgotten him long ago. Once he was known as Elias of the Silver Hands, a sculptor who could carve souls into stone. Kings had called for him. Queens had admired him. But those days had turned to ash after the curse, after the fire that took his workshop, his apprentices, and his past. Now he worked alone under the ruins, shaping silence. That afternoon, when the storm finally began to ease, Elias noticed movement by the broken doorway. A figure stood there, cloaked still, her face hidden by a hood wet with rain. For a moment he thought she was a ghost, one of those spirits that wandered the temple grounds at night. But then she spoke, and her voice was human. "Are you the sculptor they call Elias?" Her tone was calm, but it carried something strange. Not fear, not command, but recognition, as though she had been searching for him. Elias put down his chisel, brushing the white dust from his hands. "That name has not been spoken here for years," he said. "What do you want of me?" The woman stepped forward, her boots silent against the stone. She lowered her hood, revealing a pale face framed by dark hair, her eyes bright as glass, one gray, one faintly gold. There was a mark near her temple, like the trace of an old burn. "My name is Seraphine," she said softly. "I am a chronicler. I gather what remains of the old world before it vanishes completely. They told me there was still one craftsman alive who could shape truth from stone." Elias gave a tired smile. "Truth is not so simple. It doesn't hold still long enough to be carved." She looked around the workshop, at the half-finished statues covered in linen sheets. "And yet you try," he could not argue. She was right. Seraphine walked toward the statue he had been working on. The marble woman's eyes glimmered faintly in the stormlight. "Who is she?" Seraphine asked. "I don't know," Elias answered. "Someone who refuses to leave my mind." Seraphine tilted her head, studying the figure. "She looks almost alive, like she's waiting for something." Elias turned away, uncomfortable under her gaze. "She's waiting for me to stop hesitating." They stood in silence for a while. The air smelled of dust, rain, and old incense. Somewhere in the upper vaults of the temple, water dripped rhythmically into a cracked basin. Finally, Seraphine said, "May I watch you work?" Elias hesitated. He was not used to company, but especially not from strangers. But there was something steady and calm about her, something that made him feel she had already seen his solitude before. So he nodded. She removed her cloak and set it aside. Beneath it, she wore a dark traveling dress, simple but elegant, with faint embroidery at the sleeves, royal perhaps, though faded. She sat on a stone bench near the doorway, her posture graceful and still. Elias picked up his chisel again. The sound returned, tick, 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 echoing through the hall as the rain softened outside. Seraphine did not speak. She only watched, her eyes following every movement of his fingers. Her gaze was not the kind that disturbed. It was quiet, almost reverent. Yet after some time, Elias began to feel uneasy. Her attention was too focused, too deep, as though she were memorizing not the sculpture, but the way his hands moved. After an hour, he stopped to rest. "Do you always watch people like this?" he asked, half smiling. Seraphine smiled faintly in return. "Only those who forget that they are being seen." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And what have you seen, then?" "Your hands," she said. "They move as if they remember something your mind does not." The words struck him in a strange way. He looked at his own fingers, pale and rough from years of work, small scars crossing the knuckles like faint white rivers. There was a faint tremor in them now, though he could not tell if it was from her words or from the chill of the storm. "You speak as though my hands are alive," he said. "Aren't they?" she replied softly. He did not answer. When the evening fell and the last light bled through the clouds, Seraphine reached into her satchel and brought out a small wooden box. She opened it carefully, revealing a photographic device, something old and alchemic, made of brass and glass lenses that glowed faintly when touched. "I wish to take a photograph of your hands while you work," she said. "For the archives. There are no more artisans left who create with such devotion." Elias frowned. "A photograph? I thought that craft was forbidden since the Great Eclipse. The lenses steal the light of the soul. Only if the one being captured has something to hide," she said gently. He laughed softly. "Then perhaps I have much to hide." But something in her tone, respectful, almost pleading, disarmed him. Against his better judgment, he agreed. Seraphine placed the device on the table, adjusted the angles, and waited for him to resume carving. The machine hummed quietly, drawing in the faint light that still lingered through the broken ceiling. As Elias returned to his work, he tried not to think of the strange woman behind the lens. The rhythm of his craft took over again, chisel to marble, breath to silence. The statue's lips began to take shape, curved in the shadow of a secret smile. When Seraphine finally closed the shutter, the machine released a soft sigh, as though it had captured something alive. She held the glass plate in her hands, letting the image bloom slowly across its surface. Elias wiped his hands on his apron and leaned closer. But the moment his eyes caught the photograph, his breath froze. The image showed not just his hands, but light around them, pale and ghostly, like smoke rising from his fingertips. And in the half-finished marble face, the faint outline of Seraphine's own features appeared, though she had been nowhere near the sculpture. Elias took a step back. "What is this?" he whispered. "Some trick of light?" Seraphine's expression turned unreadable. "No," she said quietly. "Not light, memory." "Whose memory?" She looked down at the photograph again, then at him, her mismatched eyes glowing faintly in the dimness. "Perhaps yours," she said. "Perhaps mine." The storm outside began again, harder this time. Wind howled through the temple's broken archways, scattering dust and petals from the offerings that had long since dried. The candles flickered, and for a heartbeat, the marble statue seemed to move, only slightly, as if it had drawn breath. Elias turned sharply, staring at it. But it was still again, silent and perfect. When he looked back, Seraphine was already packing away the device. Her movements were careful, deliberate. He noticed that she did not meet his eyes now. "What did you come here for, really?" he asked. She paused at the doorway, pulling up her hood once more. "To remember," she said. "And to see if you would remember, too." "Remember what?" She smiled faintly, her face hidden by shadow. "You will know soon enough." The door creaked as she stepped into the rain. For a long moment, Elias stood alone in the workshop, his thoughts a storm louder than the one outside. He looked again at the photograph she had left behind on the table. The light in it seemed to shift, almost breathing, his hands glowing with a strange radiance, sculpting the shape of a woman's face that looked exactly like Seraphine's. He touched the edge of the image, feeling the cold glass against his fingertips. The sensation was too real, too alive, and then from the half-finished statue a faint whisper escaped, so soft it could have been the wind or memory itself. "Elias." He froze. The voice was hers. He turned toward the marble woman, but her lips were still and silent once more. The rain stopped before morning. Mist wrapped around the temple like a living veil. The air smelled of marble dust and wet earth, and the silence was heavy, the kind that made every heartbeat sound louder. Elias had not slept. The strange photograph still lay on his table, its image faintly glowing even in the dark. He had tried to convince himself it was a trick, A flaw in the lens, a reflection. But deep down, he knew better. The woman in the photograph was Seraphine, carved from his own stone. Yet he had never shaped her likeness. He kept staring at the picture until dawn painted the clouds with gray light. The memory of her whisper, that soft Elias, would not leave his mind. By midday, he could no longer stay still. He wrapped his cloak around him and stepped outside the temple. The forest below the ruins was quiet and thick with fog. Ravens watched from the branches, their feathers black as ink. Somewhere far off, a bell rang faintly, perhaps from a village that still believed in prayer. He found Seraphine waiting near the old bridge, standing like she had expected him all along. Her cloak fluttered in the wind, and when she turned, her expression carried both warmth and sorrow. "You came," she said softly. "I should be asking why you're still here," he replied. "You took something with you last night, something that doesn't belong to you." Seraphine's gaze dropped to the ground. "You mean the photograph?" "That," Elias said sharply, "and whatever power hides inside it." She sighed. "It's not power, it's memory. And memories are shared things, Elias. They don't belong to one person alone." Her words confused him even more. "You talk as if we've met before." "Perhaps we have," she said, lifting her eyes to meet his. "Or perhaps we are only meeting again after a long punishment neither of us remembers." They walked together back toward the temple, their steps echoing softly on the broken stones. Inside, the air was cold and still. The statue he had carved stood where he left it, but now there were faint lines along its arms, like cracks that glowed from within. Elias frowned and ran his fingers along the marble. "This wasn't here before," he murmured. "The curse is waking," Seraphine whispered. He looked at her sharply. "Curse? What curse?" She hesitated before answering. "The curse of the Queen of Aurelian, the last ruler before the fall. They say she bound her artisans to her will, so their works would love her even when the world forgot her name. Every statue that was made in her likeness holds a fragment of her soul, and every sculptor who touched her image vanished soon after." Elias stared at her in disbelief. "That's only a legend." "A tale for children," Seraphine shook her head. "No, I have seen the truth of it. My own mother was a historian of that court. She spent her life studying the queen's art, until one day she too disappeared." Elias stepped back. The chisel in his hand felt heavier now. "You think I was one of those artisans?" "I don't think," she said quietly. "I know." He turned away from her, his voice low and shaking. "Then why don't I remember?" Seraphine's expression softened. "Because memory is mercy, Elias. You were not meant to remember the pain." He wanted to argue, but something inside him, a dull ache in his chest, an echo of loss, and kept him silent. That night, as the wind howled through the broken ceiling, Seraphine sat near the old fire pit trying to warm her hands. Elias watched her from across the room. She looked fragile in the flickering light, her face calm but shadowed by thoughts too deep for words. Finally, she spoke. "Do you ever dream, Elias?" He nodded slowly. "I used to." "Not anymore. What did you dream of?" He hesitated. "Of a woman." Her face was hidden, but she always stood beside a pool of marble waiting for me to sculpt her reflection. Seraphine's lips trembled faintly. "That was not a dream," Elias frowned. "What are you saying?" She looked into the fire. "That woman was the queen. You served her once, long ago. You were her most gifted artist. She asked you to sculpt her likeness not as she was, but as she wished to be remembered, eternal, divine, untouchable." He felt his heart pound. The flames seemed to flicker higher as if reacting to her words. "And what happened?" Seraphine's eyes shimmered in the light. "You refused her." The room grew colder. The fire cracked. Elias could barely breathe. "She loved you," Seraphine continued softly. "She saw in your art something pure, something she wanted to possess. But when you refused her command, she cursed you and all your creations. She said, 'If you will not give me life through your art, then let your art take your life instead.'" Elias stared at his hands, the same hands Seraphine had photographed, and they seemed to tremble with some old power beneath the skin. "I don't remember any of this," he whispered. Because she made you forget, Seraphine said. But you kept creating, drawn to the same faces, the same sorrow, trying to find her again without knowing why. He looked up at her, his voice almost breaking. Then why are you here? She hesitated before answering. Because the curse did not end with her death. It was passed on. Through me. Her words fell like stones into silence. Elias stared at her in disbelief. Through you? Seraphine nodded slowly. I am her descendant, or perhaps more than that. My blood carries a fragment of her spirit. Her will still lingers in me, and it called me here, to you. The realization hit him like cold water. You came to set me free, he said. No, she said quietly. I came to see if I could be freed as well. Elias stepped closer, the shadows moving between them like threads of smoke. And how do we break this curse? Seraphine looked at the statue, the one whose face now resembled hers, and whispered, By finishing what you began. By completing the sculpture. Only then will the curse reveal its true form. He hesitated. But what if finishing it binds us both instead of freeing us? Her eyes glimmered with sorrow. Then we will know the truth, and perhaps that is freedom enough. For several days they worked together in the temple. Seraphine prepared the tools, mixed the powders, and brushed the marble clean. Elias carved with renewed purpose, guided by something more than memory, by an emotion he could not name. Sometimes, when he looked at her hands beside his, he thought he saw faint light moving under her skin, like starlight trapped in veins. At night, they spoke softly by the fire. She told him of the kingdom's fall, of how art had been forbidden because it reminded people of the queen's curse. He told her of his loneliness, of how his craft had become his only prayer. Slowly, a fragile trust grew between them, the kind that exists only between two souls who have both been haunted too long. On the fifth night, as Elias worked, Seraphine came to his side. Her eyes were distant, but her voice was steady. The statue is nearly complete, she said. But there is one thing left. What thing? You must carve the heart, she whispered. It is the heart that carries the soul. He hesitated. And whose heart am I carving? Seraphine looked at him sadly. Mine and yours. The air turned cold. Elias's hands trembled over the marble. He could not bring himself to strike the chisel. Seraphine, if this is truly the queen's curse, then you may vanish when it's done. She smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe I'll be free. But either way, this is what was meant to be. Elias's chest ached with unspoken fear. He wanted to stop her, to refuse. But something inside him, a memory of love, of devotion, of long-lost duty, guided his hand. The chisel touched the stone once more. Tick, tick, tick. The sound echoed through the hall like a heartbeat. The marble glowed faintly under his touch, as if warmth had entered it. And then, when he lifted his hand, the statue's chest shimmered, a light beating faintly within it. Seraphine gasped. It's begun, she whispered. Elias stepped back. What have I done? She looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. You've awakened the memory that sleeps between us both. Suddenly, the ground trembled. The candles flickered out. The statue's cracks widened, glowing like molten gold. The temple seemed alive again, alive and watching. And then, in the faintest whisper, a voice filled the air. The same voice from his dreams, rich and mournful. Finish what you began. Before the curse consumes you both. Elias turned to Seraphine, his heart pounding. But she was no longer standing. She had fallen to her knees, her hands pressed over her heart, her skin pale as marble. He rushed to her side. Seraphine! She opened her eyes, glowing faintly with that same golden light, and whispered, It's her. She's waking. And then the light flared.